Okay, now we move on to Chapter 9, where we start looking at conflict and negotiation, which happens in teams and groups. Our learning objectives this time is to look at the definition of conflict and functional conflict and dysfunctional conflict, how we can manage interpersonal conflict, how we can describe the impact of intergroup conflict on organizational performance, why we even have intergroup conflict, how it occurs, and compare the consequences of intergroup conflict within and between different groups and teams. And we can look at some different techniques that can be used to manage intergroup conflict. For organizations to perform effectively, interdependent groups do need to establish effective working relationships. These are done across organizational boundaries. They're established between people and among different kinds of groups. A confrontation between groups that can enhance and benefit organizational performance. When conflict focuses on the tasks, it's constructive. The debate actually improves decision-making and work outcomes. This can be looked at as creative tension. So it is good to have a little bit of conflict, but we don't want conflict so mad that we raise blood pressure and people start thinking in different ways, but so that it actually improves creativity. When we have intergroup dysfunctional conflict, it's any confrontation or interaction between groups that can harm the organization and can also prevent the achievement of any particular type of goals. It's important for managers to look at ways to eliminate what is being termed as dysfunctional conflict. If it negatively affects the performance of the group or team to achieve the outcomes that the organization is looking for, then it has to be taken care of. Conflict can have a positive or negative impact on organizational performance. And this depends on the nature of the conflict and how we manage the conflict. As I said, some level of conflict does help with creative tension. When there's no conflict, usually people are bored, there's no innovation, people don't adapt to change because there's no incentive. When it's too high, people are under stress and there's sort of a survival going on and they feel threatened. Again, this is portrayed by this particular slide when you look at performance levels. When we have sort of a moderate level of intergroup conflict, then we see a fairly high level of performance. When it's very low, as I said, people motivation going on or creative discussions that might lead to high performance. And when it's too high, they're usually busy defending themselves or their territory, and productivity is really low. Managers try to eliminate conflict, whether it's dysfunctional or functional. They're often, we go through life thinking we're supposed to have harmony, that we don't want to have conflict, and we learn that in our home, our schools, our churches. We often evaluate managers on whether there's conflict in their areas of responsibility and how that's played out. So we are rewarded in our organizations for no conflict, so we have to watch out for that. Conflict that impacts group functioning is whether there's a task, where there's a different opinion on how this should be accomplished, and the group members actually have different perspectives. We might have conflict when people don't get along with one another, and we might have conflict when people don't like how the work is actually being accomplished. When we have intergroup conflict, around work interdependence, we look at the fact that no interaction among the groups because each performs separately, so we don't have communication going on, and we've just made everybody interdependent, and then that could lead to some conflict later. Sequential interdependence, one group completes its task before another can complete its task, and it creates a stress. We might have reciprocal independent, each group output serves as input to other groups, and this can also cause some conflict when it isn't in synergy. We might have differences in goals. One group might have limited resources that are allocated or not allocated. They might be dependent on another group, and they might feel that they're not getting their fair share. There might be conflict when one group feels that it's rewarded, when another group is rewarded more for the performance than they were, and they felt that they did as much, if not more work. This kind of relates back to our equity theory that we talked about in some of our previous chapters. Intergroup conflict occurs when, as a result of different perceptions. We might have different goals. We might have different deadlines and time horizons. We might have people's different perceptions of who has more status in terms of leadership. We might have a need for people to be more specialized in how they solve certain problems or conflicts within our group or team. We have line staff conflict, and some of the common causes of this are the line sometimes feels that they are diminished in terms of their recognition. There might actually be social and physical differences in terms of white collar, blue collar. There might be knowledge differences, and there might actually be different loyalties between maybe a certain department or a certain kind of profession. We have different kinds of dysfunctional conflict consequences when changes within groups. We might actually increase group cohesiveness, rise in autocratic leadership. We might focus on activity, emphasize loyalty. We might see changes between groups with distorted perception, different stereotyping, and different decreased communication between the groups. How do we manage the intergroup conflict? Well, it's interesting to note that managers spend about 20% of their time, it's actually higher, in conflict management. Most of their time is actually managing resources that are considered in conflict. There's a number of methods that are outlined in your book around conflict resolution. There's a whole approach to how we actually solve problems, how we prioritize and set goals in so that they are more realistic. How we actually expand the use of resources and spread them out so that groups are not in conflict. How we might avoid conflicts between teams in terms of anticipation. How we might smooth over conflicts. How we might make compromises between groups and teams. How we might look at the leadership and authority within a team and what kind of responsibility they have. We might change some of the people in our team environment, so we change the human variable. We might actually look at how the group is structured and who they report to. And often they've found in research that if a group has a common enemy or a scapegoat, it forces the cohesiveness of a team and eliminates some of the conflict. Some things that happen in terms of negotiating, in terms of team, we might try to be more collaborative. We might actually pursue joint gains. How can we have more? How can the needs be met between the teams, and how can we see value created when maybe no one saw it before? If negotiation is done poorly, we have what's often known as the street fight, when we could have extensive conflicts with subordinates, our customers, our suppliers, our superiors. Conflict negotiation is an important skill to teach in our organization. We also have cultural influences that might play out in some of our negotiation practices. This plays back to Hofstede, which we talked about in the culture chapter, whereas we might look at individualism and collectivism. In an individualistic culture, we tend to have more conflict. When people feel that there's a lot of uncertainty and they want to avoid it, they try to smooth over some conflict. When we have significant degrees of hierarchy in organizations, different conflicts occurs, and we have cultures that tend to be more assertive, or what they call masculine by Hofstede's definition, there tends to be more conflict. We also have communication issues where we might have conflict because somebody doesn't understand someone because they speak language differently, or they might tend to have strong nonverbal communication. We're going to talk a little bit about group negotiations, and this takes place when one group depends on the cooperation of another group, and maybe one group doesn't have as much control over the other group, so we end up in a negotiation situation. There's different ways to approach that. We have pre-negotiation tasks where we do fact-finding, where we ask questions. We want to know the values, beliefs of the other side. We try to exchange information with them so that we can prepare to meet a negotiation table in an open, honest way. When we get to negotiation, there's different tactics that are played out there. We'll see things like, I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy, or vice versa. We might put little things forward that they call a nibble to see what the reaction might be, or the response of the other team. We might actually engage in joint problem solving where each one tries to solve the problem together. We might have one team or group that actually uses its power and competitive ability to influence the other team's outcomes. We might just say, hey, let's split the difference. Or we might go real low in terms of if we're negotiating with a customer or a client and see if we can pull them in by giving them a lower estimate of something that it would be to solve a problem. We also have personalities that affect negotiations. We have people who want to, that want to solve the problem based on power. We see persuaders that, they're trying to use their influence. We have people that are always reliable and objective, and we have some people that are basically limited in their ability to help in negotiations. Trust is one of the biggest characteristics leading to effective negotiation. There's a higher chance of success if the groups trust each other and trust the people negotiating. Managers expect people to be a little bit distrustful when they're negotiating, but hope that they're coming from a better position of integrity. Sometimes we see bluffing. It's not always wise to use that, but it is a negotiation skill. We want to place someone, and this is cultural as well, where someone loses face in the negotiation process. Some of the alternatives to direct negotiation, if we actually get to an impasse between teams and groups, we have what's called mediation, where we call in a third party to help with a dispute. When we actually have mediation, we might have that third party make a decision, but the parties are not necessarily bound to this proposed resolution. An impartial person works with each side. They allow conflict to be resolved, hopefully before hostilities set in. It's a good idea to use mediators. The groups can still go ahead and make their own decisions. Another alternative is arbitration, and this is more of a legal aspect when we bring in a third party to resolve the dispute. And when we actually get to arbitration, when the arbitrator makes a decision, this decision the parties are bound to, that they can render a decision in favor of one group, both groups, or ask for more information. But once that decision is made, the groups agree that they're going to follow the arbitrator's decision. To have effective negotiations, it's always good to have team building, encourage people to work together. We had our team, team and group dynamics in our last chapter. Then we want to work at building teams to identify common goals, to have good communication, to hopefully reduce any sort of conflict. And as we keep coming back to in every aspect of what we're looking at in organizational behavior, we want to improve organizational performance. Team building is a process. There's a commitment to it. Again, it's fact-finding, diagnosis, plans of action. We would like to reduce team conflict, and conflict is often caused in teams when we have role confusion, when people aren't sure of the goals, when people don't get along very well, and when people ignore each other's in terms of some of their needs. The manager's role in team building is to create commitment among team builders, to come from a position of trust, to share information, to train people, and if there is a union, to develop a partnership that's fair and equitable. When we manage intergroup conflict, we want to stimulate at a functional level better communication. Like we talked about in different forms of how we bring in outside individuals into our groups, how we want to minimize any kind of conflict, how we introduce them, how we have learning theory. We might alter the organization structure or the team so that these people fit. We have that person fit that we talked about back in stress management. And we might actually have a little bit of competition among groups. We found that that's a little bit healthy in organizational performance, but not so much that people get confrontative in a negative sort of way. We want to be careful about having it resort to a dysfunctional conflict.